Welcome to all learners. Teach to the test. That's the adage that we teachers normally follow. But when we think of the new assessment practices, that is assessing holistically the development of learners in scholastic as well as co-scholastic activities, this adage is an exception. In today's session, we are going to discuss about the topic Techniques of Assessment and Evaluation, Part 1. Part 2 we will continue in the next session. What is the purpose of assessment and evaluation? Always you know that what is assessment, how assessment is taking place, what comes in the process of assessment. Before going into the techniques of assessment, we will see what is the purpose of assessment and evaluation. The first purpose, we can see that it is to assist in student learning. So how assessment assist in student learning is a question mark. When we conduct one activity, after that if we give an activity, we try to assess the learners, either orally or verbally or through any activity. Here comes the importance of the learners to know how they are performing when they got the assessment feedback. Secondly, to identify students' strengths and weaknesses. You know that as teachers, we have to know what are the strengths of the students as well as the weaknesses of each student. And this assessment, it provides feedback to know the strengths and weaknesses of students. Thirdly, to assess the effectiveness of a particular instructional strategy. We may adopt in classroom different strategies, but we don't know whether that strategy is good or bad. Here comes the importance that through the assessment, the results give us that whether the strategy is effective or not. And then we can see that the next purpose of assessment is to improve the effectiveness of curriculum programs. We have framed different curriculum programs. How do we know that whether it is apt for the learner? Here comes the importance of assessing. This assessment feedback gives us the results regarding whether the program to be improved or whether there is any difficulty or deficiency in the program, so that we can remodify the program according to the needs of the learners. Next point, to assess and improve teaching effectiveness. How normally as teachers we may think that assessment is useful for learners only. No, it's not like that. It is useful to the teachers also. To assess and improve the teaching effectiveness is another purpose of assessment and evaluation. Then comes to communicate with and involve parents and guardians in their children's learning. So what we will do, we will first inform to the students, but that's not enough. We have to inform the parents or sometimes the caretakers who are responsible for the students. Here comes the purposes of the assessment. We have discussed the different purposes of assessment. When we look at assessment, we know that assessment is an ongoing process and it is an important part in teaching learning process. And in this process, what comes into our mind is which techniques of assessment and evaluation we have to use. This is the main question that comes to our mind. So there are different assessment techniques and tools, but which one is suitable for the present age appropriate class or for a particular content? When we are confronting with this type of question, there comes some criteria that as a teacher we have to consider. Next, we are going to discuss about what should be kept in mind while we are deciding what type of assessment technique I have to take. First one, by now we have discussed the different purposes of assessment and evaluation. Assessment is an integral part in teaching learning process, and we cannot say that by keeping it at the end of a course that assessment can be done. It's not possible like that. It has to go along with the teaching learning process. And when we do like this, another question that confronts the teachers is that how do I know which technique is suitable for the particular content? And when we come to this point, here we have to be very careful about certain criteria. So next we are going to discuss about the different points to be kept in mind while selecting an assessment technique. First one, which technique should I use to get the adequate feedback? All the techniques may not be useful for all the content and for all the learner. So here comes the relevance of selecting an appropriate technique. Secondly, how will I apply this technique in my class? Whether it may be orally or verbally or through an activity or through some role play. So these are some of the questions that come to our mind. Next criteria, that is, will the assessment technique provides adequate information about what students are learning in classrooms. What we have to keep in mind is that the assessment technique should align with the learning objectives, otherwise it won't give the appropriate result. Does the technique focus on various variables that can be changed to promote better learning? This is also important when we consider the assessment techniques. Next point, are the results derived from the use of a particular evaluation tool easy to analyze? So these are some of the criteria that we have to be very careful while we want to select a particular type of assessment technique. And coming onwards, again we have to consider some more criteria, that is, how will I know that the technique is useful or not to assess students? Sometimes we may select a technique and that may not give the appropriate result. There we have to know whether the technique that I have selected will give the result what I wanted. Next, what effort should I make to arrange better teaching learning practices based on the information I received? So here's some kind of betterment that we have to make in the teaching learning process. Then we are going to discuss about the various assessment techniques that can be used in classroom. When we think of that, we can classify it as concept test, self-report techniques, assignments, observation techniques, peer assessment, sociometry technique, portfolios. When we think of concept test, we can see that these concept tests, they are conceptual multiple choice questions that focus on one key concept of an instructor's learning goals for a lesson. When a teacher uses this concept test is that that it is to assess the learner's understanding of a particular concept. We know that for each teaching point there contains different concepts, and in order to know how much the learners have understood the concept, we use this concept test. Normally, we may use this concept test in the beginning of our instruction and in the midst of the instruction also, whether the learners are able to understand particular concept in a better way. When this concept test is coupled with a student interaction through peer instruction, concept tests represent a rapid method of formative assessment of student understanding. We know that we will assess the learners continuously. There comes formative assessment as well as summative assessment. So this concept test, it functions as a formative assessment technique. When we select concept test, we have to think about the 7 principles of concept test. The first principle, that is to encourage teacher-student contact. Always there should be a rapport between the teacher and student. Secondly, encourage cooperation among students. When some kind of test we are giving, they have to do in groups. There we need the cooperation among students. Next, to encourage active learning. Without active learning, nothing takes place. So through this concept test, we have to make sure that this active learning process is taking place. Next point, give prompt feedback. Already we have discussed that this concept test is used as a formative assessment, and there comes the need to give immediate feedback to learners. Next, to emphasize time on task. Within the stipulated time, the learners have to finish the test. Next, communicate high expectations. What are the expectations that the learners have to achieve? That we should convey to the learner. Next come respect diverse talents and ways of learning. We know that all the learners will not learn in the same way. Some may be kinesthetic learners, some may be oral learners, some may be tactile learners. So we have to make sure that we have to respect, sure, as well as to respect the diverse talents and ways of learning of students. When we consider this concept test, we should be very careful in selecting the stems. The stems used in concept test questions. We can use questions such as, which of the following best describes? So we can see that some kind of reflective thinking is taking place in this case. Secondly, which is the best method for? Next, if the value of n was changed to, then so that we will give scope for the learners to think on their own. Next, we can ask them which of the following is the best explanation for dash, so that we can give the content what we want. So this type of stems will provide the learners a scope for rethinking of their concepts. Then again we can ask them which of the following is another example of dash. What is the major problem with X or Y? What would happen if? So these type of questions will elicit the thinking process of learners. Next, we are going to discuss about self-report techniques. From the term itself, we can identify these self-report techniques. They are data gathering tools where respondents provide information about themselves. Various self-reporting tools are used normally in classrooms. There may be interview, diaries, questionnaire and reflective journal. In this session, we will discuss some of these self-reporting tools in detail. And the self-reporting techniques, they are used to assess various traits or attitudes possessed by the individuals. So as they are self-reporting, there will be no compulsion on the part of the learners to express their ideas. This is the advantage of these self-report techniques. And then comes the functions of interview. The next tool is interview. When we think of interview, we know that there are two participants, interviewer and interviewee. What are the functions of interview is that it is to identify the areas of difficulty and gaps in understanding a concept. And secondly, this interview helps to know how students are able to apply their knowledge in new situations. Next, to examine how students' understanding change with teaching learning process. And next, to obtain verbal feedback about teaching techniques. And when we think of these functions of this interview, we can see that the interview gives an opportunity for the interviewee to express their ideas in their own fashion and in their own manner. So this is the advantage of interview. Then comes the focus group discussion. When we think of this focus group discussion, what we have in our mind is that the term itself will reveal how the term focus is important in that. In the focus group discussion, there will be a moderator, it may be a teacher or some other person, and the moderator will always invite the attention of the audience or focus the attention of the audience towards a particular topic. That's why we use the term focus group discussion. And what is the purpose of this focus group discussion is that we can generate new ideas and concepts. Secondly, to obtain general background information about a topic of interest. Thirdly, to generate research hypothesis. Fourthly, diagnosing the problem in a new way. Then, to examine how respondents talk about the selected topic. Next, to interpret previously obtained results. Well, we are discussing about the different techniques that is used for assessment. Next, I invite your attention to the next assessment technique, that is questionnaire. The term shows that it is a self-report data collection technique that each participant fills out in the given form. So here, through the questionnaire, the participants can express their own decisions or their own ideas without any compulsion. Then comes the important point, when do we use questionnaire? So there we can think that we can use questionnaire to collect feedback from a large number of students, to know students' opinions, attitudes, feelings and perception about a particular issue, to allow each student to give anonymous feedback. So this questionnaire is very useful, that there will be no compulsion on the part of the learners. Then comes the reflective journal. So in the case of these self-report techniques, you can see the part are questionnaire, reflective journal, focus group discussion. All this comes under the category of self-report techniques. When we think of reflective journal, we can say that it is a tool where students can reflect on and write about their progress in learning. And in this reflective journal, there is scope for the learners to write their own thinking in a free way. There will be no compulsion on the part of the learners. And when we try to use this reflective journal, the major thing that we have to think that when to use, how could I use it? So these are some of the points that comes to our mind. When to use, daily or weekly, how could I use it? There you can use it as a self-assessment tool for students at the beginning or end of a unit, topic or project, as a communication tool for students and teachers. And one more question will come to our mind when we think of reflective journal. Why should I use it? This is a pertinent question. By using reflective journal, it enhances higher order thinking, it leads to self-assessment, it sets goals for future learning, it gives students a sense of ownership and control on their own learning. There will be no compulsion on the part of the learners. Then comes observation technique. This observation is used as a technique to evaluate various aspects of behavior in controlled or uncontrolled situations. There are two types of situations, and in these situations, how do we use observation as a technique is important. And in classrooms, as teachers, we may observe the learners, but without their knowing or without their understanding also. This observation is very important in teaching learning process. What we have to consider when we prepare an observation checklist? Some points are important here. Firstly, write down the criteria to be observed. Secondly, inform students about the criteria to be observed. Determine the specific outcomes to assess. Then develop a data gathering system. So besides these points, we have to think that what to record, or record the date of observation. Target observation on one or two specific outcomes. Share observation details with individuals or target groups. Use the collected information to modify your instruction. So based on the observation results, it gives scopes to modify the instruction. And when we think of this observation, we can see that the types of observation are classified into two: participant observation and non-participant observation. In participant observation, the observer has to play a double role, dual roles. What are they? They be a member of the group and they act as an observer. So there we can see the participant is acting the dual roles. So what is the disadvantage in participant observation is that when students come to know that they are observed by somebody, the real behavior will not come into effect. So this observation, participant observation, besides this participant observation, the non-participant observation is very useful. In non-participant observation, the observer is observing the target group without their understanding, so that they will come to know the real behavior of the students. So what we have learned in this session is that what are the functions of this different assessment, what are the criteria to be kept in mind, and then the various assessment tools which are classified into concept test, self-report techniques, then observation techniques, then focus group, which is a part of the self-report techniques, reflective journal, questionnaire. All this comes under the part of focus group discussion. And then we have discussed about the observation technique. So I hope that all of you have understood about the different assessment techniques. We will discuss the later assessment techniques in the next session.